Most programmers think that art is impossible, and I wanted to go through and talk about how that's not the case. I am a programmer and I've moved into doing all the art for our new game. So I think making that transition isn't all that difficult. I just think you have to change the way you think. I wanted to go through and tell you different ideas of how I have transitioned into doing the art. It is something that so many people can do if you want to code a game and make some good art. It is a possibility. You don't have to do terrible art just because you're a coder. I think a lot of art programs are moving towards being programmer friendly. If you look at Unity, for example, when you have shaders or animations or Blender where when you're doing different things there, a lot of it uses nodes and visual scripting, something that people that program kind of understand. I think when you're trying to do something that's hand drawn, someone that doesn't have that really nice hand strokes with a brush is going to always struggle. But there's so many workarounds with this when you've got vector programs that you can use. I mean, vectors, you can even program a vector to make a picture if you wanted to. Blender is also a little bit about plotting points. Sometimes having a mathematical way of thinking can actually be helpful. I think the key to deciding on what makes art better is to have consistency more so than a really high fidelity. It's fun to make some art that looks different and it's all linked together. There's no point having one house that doesn't match a character or a building, a tree that doesn't match the grass. That's just where a lot of art falls apart. You finding things that match together on the same color palette is really important. The biggest thing that I did wrong when I was starting out doing art was not designing a color palette. There's so many websites you can generate a color palette. All you have to do is put a picture into that and they'll go, here's a color palette. If you want to go that way, you can search the internet for different color palette. But finding a color palette where all the colors go together is really important when it comes to art. Lighting can change 3D models in a game so much. I have built games where I've purchased 3D models that look really good into a scene and they look bad because I didn't understand lighting when I started building games. That's why if you ever buy a Unity asset, you'll often see that they come with a pre-made scene so they can control the lights and show you that it actually looks good instead of when you drag it into your game and it looks terrible because you haven't set up your lights properly. Spend some time to work out what lighting is going to make your game look right. If you want to make a really nice nighttime scene, add a blue light to the scene. It looks like a really cool nighttime scene. Post-processing can be almost as important as lighting. Where this is different though, don't start with your post-processing. You need to get your art looking good and then you can add some post-processing to really highlight the art and improve the art. Just give it that extra 10%, maybe a little bit of bloom or adjust the coloring ever so slightly. It's almost impossible to make a scene look really good just with post-processing. If you try and make bad art look good with post-processing, it will never work. If you have to go and buy some assets, this is where learning some Blender is important because then you can import those assets into Blender and you can then modify them to make them more similar. For example, if you bought some houses from one creator and then you bought some characters from a different creator, maybe you could change the materials on those models, or maybe you can just change the shape of those models. You can make them a little bit similar in some respects. And often if you start bringing other people's assets into Blender, it shows you different ways that people have actually made those models. So that makes it really good for learning more about Blender and what you can do with Blender. If you guys subscribe, I'm going to be talking about my new Fishing Factory game over the coming year. I also want to talk about different ways that I did the art for this project. This is just my first look at art, and I'm going to keep on improving, and I want to really deep dive into some of these scenarios to see what people like. Also comment what type of art styles should I talk about in the coming videos. If you've got something in particular that you want me to talk about, I'm all for it. If you're using Unity, a Unity render pipeline is important. Don't use the basic pipeline anymore unless you're making a mobile game or something like that. Both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. The universal render pipeline doesn't get into some of the more complex post-processing that the HD render pipeline does. If you've really hell bent on one type of post-processing effect, just check that it is something you can do in the pipeline that you're choosing to use in Unity. It's important to plan this stuff at the start. Some different effects aren't as easy to achieve in different pipelines, but then the HD pipeline probably do some more refinement to get that game to run on lower end devices. Shaders are really amazing for all kinds of different reasons. They help bring water to life. You can make some materials with shaders. One advantage with shaders is that different effects with your materials in Unity, and they aren't expensive for the process of the game, so that you can still run those games on lower end machines. I added a shader to the faces of my robot because I wanted their face to move a little bit whilst they were walking. I'm still not sure I'm happy with what I've ended up with, but I will keep working on these shaders. You could spend a lot of time learning on shaders, but to do some basic things with shaders, you can achieve a lot with not very much by just linking up a few nodes to make something pretty interesting for different effects in your game. Particles are really good for adding some extra action to a scene. With some particles, you can add some steam, some smoke. It just adds a little bit of life to the scene with particles. I think Unity sets the particles to 1,000. I normally turn that right down to like a couple of particles at a time, and you might have a puff of smoke come out of here or a bit of an explosion when you hit the tree. But particles can really transform a scene quicker than you imagine. Particles, shaders, and animations are so important. They're tedious, but they're so important to making your art come to a higher level. For any programmer starting with art, one real simple rule that I found that made things more authentic and real is not measuring everything. I mean, if you're making some floors that have to join up together and fit perfectly in a grid, then you measure that. But I'm talking about when you're making a character or a tree, grab a node and drag it a little bit, and all of a sudden it becomes more realistic. It loses its rigidness, which many programmers find that hard to do. Moving a node by 0.14763, that hurts their brains on all levels. But just let it be. Just let those unperfect parts help your art look more realistic. The best way to find out if your art is working, and so if you've been making something in Blender for some time now, I might make a few parts. I would make some of the ground, I would make some of the housing, some of the trees, and maybe one character. And then I will import them into Unity and create a little scene with those pieces of art that I've made in Blender and see if they're working, because things look very different in Unity to what they look like in Blender. Also, might might not have allowed for the camera angle that you have chosen for your game. Our game, I changed the way that some of the things look because the camera angle was coming down on a 30-degree angle, which it didn't really work for our camera angle. So that's what I would say. Import your art from Blender into Unity. Have a look how it looks in the scene. Have a little bit of a play with it. Don't try and build everything. The easiest way to animate is to make small animations. You don't need really complex animation. For your character, you can use things like Mixamo, where you dropped your character in there and pick some pre-walking animation and export it. That's all good. But for little things like a gate or a boat or a tree or all of these kind of things, the easiest way to animate them is to put small movements where you select a starting point and then you select an ending point, and then you make the animation go back to the starting point. For example, with my pickaxe here animation, it's just swinging from the top down and back up to the same position, and it repeats that over and over. Making simple animations like that really evolves your art to a massive next level. Most programmers are just lazy when it comes to animation and don't like doing it. It doesn't mean you can't do it, just get energetic. Everything joining and being cohesive. It looks like somebody's made all of that game together as part of one project. Also, a problem that a lot of game developers get into, they start their game as they continue to do the art, they improve their art and the process and the speed and everything like that. And by the end of their game, they're going back and remaking their whole game. The problem with doing that is that you are going to you'll improve again for the next cycle. So then you'll want to redo it all again. You're best off just keeping with the style that you choose at the start and working with that all the way through to the completion of the game. Anything that you've learnt, use that for your next project. If you have art that you're not that happy with, try just highlighting certain parts of the art. For example, you might really work with the hair and create really amazing hair, and the grass might be really amazing. So you have these two things that are really amazing, and everything else in between isn't quite as good as you'd hoped, but having it consistent, that contrast sometimes makes for an interesting looking game. At the end of the day, I used to really struggle with art. What got me involved with this to start with was that I started designing a lot of the levels, and I found it easier to get into Blender and make the levels, and then I would pass them to our artist and he would do the art for those levels. Over time, I realized that what I was giving him, he would just put a nice material on what I'd passed him. He didn't do that much with the pieces that I gave him. Everyone can improve on their art and get better over time. It's just doing it. The important part is finding a place to start and staying consistent with each project that you build. And remember, art's about having fun. I think that's something that programmers forget to. How funny is this? Like, I made this knife cutting machine and I just thought it was funny. It made me laugh. It was cute and adorable. It took me a little bit to get to here, but it's only about a year or so. Everyone can do this. Thank you for watching, and talk to you guys next video.